Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The Committee on Education, Finance, Taxation now convenes this roundtable. The roundtable notices were given to the media. First notice on November 17, second notice on December 6, and today is Monday, December 11. And the time is now 9 o'clock. The committee will hear and accept testimony, both oral and written, on the following. The roundtable is specifically about the rebuilding of Simon Sanchez. Okay? Joining me today are my colleagues. I have to my left Senator Will Castro, to my right Senator Frank Uggan, and to further down would be Senator Tom Uggan. Correction, Tom Adams. It's dangerous, too many Uggans. General rules for the round table is we will accept all the testimony from all the individuals that were invited. We have here today, we have Mr. Sanchez representing Mr. Fernandez because he's down with the flu. We have Mr. Languero, who's the Deputy Director for DPW. We have Mr. Spaudon from the Attorney General's office. And we have Mrs. Brooks, Honorable Senator Brooks, the OPA. Ladies and gentlemen, basically, the only reason why I called the round table is because the legislature, I think, have done its due diligence. It passed the first bill in 2013. It passed another bill in 2017. And there's another bill pending, and it's all about Simon Sanchez. And I think after 4 years, I've heard Senator Tom Adams mention it's not about the bills. I think we've done everything we could. It's about the process. And I would like to hear first from DPW on what is it going to take, even with the protests ongoing, or immediately after the protest is done, what is it going to take to get Simon Sanchez built? And because of the numerous protests that have happened, I was hoping by now the I's were all dotted and the T's are crossed, because I know the Attorney General is looking at that, and so is the OPA. I think with a number of protests, all those I's should have been dotted maybe 10 times and the T's crossed maybe more. But maybe if, and I know you as the new Deputy Director is probably caught in the middle now because, but I'm hoping that you're very familiar with what's going on because you were part of the 4 brand new schools that were built maybe about 6 years ago. And I know you're familiar with what it takes to build Simon Sanchez and get this over with. So maybe we'll start with you, Mr. Languero. Before we get, or OPA, Ms. Brooks, Senator Brooks. Great, then we'll start with you then, and then we'll know how he's going to fix it up as the new Deputy Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for having this roundtable discussion. I think it's a very good opportunity. My perspective is just really coming in from when OPA received the first appeal. And what I saw during the testimony, and it was really very, very extensive testimony, both in the first and the second appeals that happened with Cortec. And maybe let me just kind of give you a timeline, first of all, of it. There's also this innuendo or urban myth that these protests are frivolous. And I want to say that I think companies and vendors really take it to heart because it costs them a lot of money on the part hiring their attorneys and all the time and effort. So in the first appeal, okay, which we did consolidate it, okay, we resolved it in 152 days from the initial filing of June 2016 to the consolidated decision in November. They were denied in part and granted in part. And Cortec was actually awarded reasonable costs incurred in connection. So we did see that area. The third appeal, okay, OPA, PA 1701, we issued that in 2017. Again, it was denied in part and granted in part, but this time no costs were awarded. And that appeal was resolved in 86 days. All right. Now, this was a procurement that, and I'm going to have to kind of point fingers back to the legislature, back to the enabling legislation. And what I've said is, the legislature made it very open-ended. It did not establish a limit, okay, as to what Simon Sanchez was going to cost. It was only during what DPW did that the limit of $100 million was derived. I don't even know how that came about, because during the hearing we did ask questions. How did you arrive at this $100 million number? And I guess later on, my memory's a little bit hazy, but it's on the record, $75 to $80 million, 70 to 80 million, broad range, for Simon Sanchez, and possibly the rest to do the study and try to do some of the other schools. Then the other thing that I found a little bit disconcerting was I asked during the testimony, and this question then posed to Gita was, well, what is $100 million going to cost us? You know, what is the ballpark range? What is your range of what $100 million is going to cost us? And Gita said, oh, we haven't gotten yet that far. And I said, oh my gosh, $100 million, don't you even have a high and a low? You know, but they didn't, you know, what this would end up costing us, you know, because knowing that this procurement of $100 million is quite huge, the debt service in the form of leaseback payments is going to also be quite significant. And the question also of maintenance, how much is the maintenance going to cost us, also couldn't yet be derived until the RFP was kind of decided, because, you know, we've got a couple of extremes, you know, like $1 million is what it's costing us right now in annual maintenance fees for JFK. And the Okudu, I forgot now, Rod, do you recall, was initially low, and then when they did the second expansion, you know, they really made up for it. And it's not quite $1 million, but it's not the $500,000 that it was for Okudu. So it's somewhere, you know, so that was quite significant. But what I saw throughout, you know, and I asked this question, how many $100 million contracts do you folks get, DPW? And, you know, you can count on one hand the number of $100 million contracts. And what I found a little bit disconcerting, because this kind of was like a three-headed, for lack of a better word, monster, because DPW was there, DOE was there, and Gita was there. And what I did not see was who truly was in charge. Everybody kind of like, DPW said, okay, if DOE, you know, or Gita, you know, everybody kind of, nobody took what I call the bull by the horns and said, all right, we're, you know, doing it. You know, it was all kind of like give and take. And what I saw also is DOE did not know what it wanted. DOE did not have the foggiest idea of what they wanted for Simon Sanchez. That's why there were so many different versions going back. You know, DOE initially started out with a 750-seat auditorium, then it went to 500-seat auditorium, and then it went to a multi-purpose, you know, and even things, I mean, we even got down to issues like artificial turf versus grass, the color. I said, wow, we're cutting so much, you know, and then even the number of classrooms and the change. So DOE itself was partly in this whole process, not, hey, you know, a procurement takes a long time when the government does not know what it wants. And that's fundamentally what I saw. And because this is an RFP, okay, you know, your design, this was a design build, meaning the design, and that's what was taking up a lot of time because no one really knew exactly. And logically, DPW did defer to DOE in that area, changing this to that, changing that. And then the question became, was this general specifications, general concepts versus specific specifications? And specific specifications are very different from general, and there was all kinds of back and forth as to what this was. So part of, is that there's a lot of, when the government really does not know what it wanted, that's really where you're open to this. And even afterwards, in the second appeal, we had to go back and calculate, because the legislature's formula for how much money was to be left to design the rest of the schools was very complicated. We had to really figure this out. And what I found was nobody else was looking at that amount, at that. Okay, thank you. My staff was getting to me the information what Okudu is costing us by comparison to the other items. But anyway, even that calculation of the leftover money supposedly for the rest of the schools, that kind of became kind of like a secondary element, because everybody was focused on Simon Sanchez, but not knowing, hey, we've got other schools we need to take care of. And so all of these were just kind of the factors. And when the government, part of it, I have to say, is looking back now, is the legislation was very complicated, okay? All right, the initial legislation going back to the 13th and the 14th when it authorized all this was really very complicated. And so when you think about that timeline, when it was first introduced to now where we are today, I don't know from the time the legislation passed, I didn't kind of take into time when DPW went out on the appeal, on the RFP, how long a time frame was there. I just know I've only been keeping track from the time that we've gotten the appeals and kind of knowing from that. So the legislation was complicated. The Department of Education did not necessarily know initially what it wanted for Simon Sanchez, and I hope by now that given all the time that has lapsed, they are now firm. This is how many classrooms we want, this is how much square foot it's going to be, blah, 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 because a lot of time has lapsed since, it's been over a year. So let's hope we're not going to get into issues of specification anymore, that we know what we want, Simon Sanchez, how big it is, how many classrooms, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, the cost, and the complicated nature of trying to do all of this in one fell swoop, as opposed to dividing it up in parts. Let's focus on Simon Sanchez first, and then let's do the rest of the schools later, because that's how the RFP initially went out, was a grand combined total. And nobody knew where the numbers were going, because Simon Sanchez was going to take the lion's share, and then the repair and the study of the schools, then to go out on a design rebuild would follow. So that, in essence, is just overall my concern and what I saw. And then at the DPW end of things, well, in this respect, I guess it's good to rely on staff, because now the heads have been changing. But what I saw there during the testimony and is the then deputy at that time often had to refer to staff. Well, staff know what they're doing. Staff know what they're doing. Well, staff is not going to be the ones to sign off. It's you're going to be the one to sign off. What do you say? And those questions could not be answered. So, the RFP, or now IFB, is a very complicated area and needs, you kind of need to know it like the back of your hand when you're dealing with construction of this magnitude. And it is, and it required as I was quoted in the paper, all hands on deck to really know and to be there and to just devote all of their time and effort. I know from a staffing point of view that cannot sometimes be the case, but from a management perspective, you got to know where your priority is. This your priority, and give it all the time and intention that it needs. So those are just some of the observations that I saw, from the two appeals, or actually three appeals, three appeals into two decisions that I saw. Now, of course, I can't speak to what's happening with the current appeal because that is in progress. All right. Thank you, Senator and Chair, for giving me an opportunity just to kind of speak my observations.
Thank you. We do appreciate. I'd like to also recognize that we have Speaker B.J. Cruz has joined us and Vice Speaker Senator Lai. Now I think I'll turn to DPW before I ask the AG where they plan on going with this, with the protest that's recent, only because of the newspaper article that's out there. But DPW, maybe you can tell us about, just with the information that Senator Brooks has brought up, the OPA, there's a lot of missing parts. And I understand with a current bill that's being considered, it's passing it off to DOE as being the lead. For me, it doesn't matter who's in charge. You should have been, the folks should have gotten together, but you're the new deputy director now, and you're the one that I know that Senator Brooks will be seeing your signature on any future documents. And maybe you can speak on behalf of DPW.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Brooks was absolutely right. I'm at an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time. I wasn't here during the first four appeals, but I'm here today, and from all the information I've gathered, going back to the OPA's discussion of DOE's inability, to come up with certain specifications for the school, may it be collateral equipment, may it be the number of classrooms, may it be even the sizes of the classrooms, all this then was something that wasn't concrete. Today, when I first got in, and actually got on board on the 23rd of October, I had asked our team to go back to DOE and see if they had any updated versions of their specifications, of their collateral equipment, anything that we can add on to the existing information we already do have. And I think we had the last version of it, and we're sticking with that. I think is everything that DOE is looking for in Simon Sanchez, so that it can meet all their standards, so that they can provide a proper education for their kids. So I think we're squared with that. As far as where we're at today, we will be meeting with the OPA, as a matter of fact, rather soon, and we're going to deal with the appeals that Cortec has against DPW regarding the Simon Sanchez IFB. Once that's completed, and we're confident that the OPA will judge in favor of the DPW, and then we will move forward and we'll go ahead and initiate the next IFB for Simon Sanchez.
What could that possible timetable be?
Well, we're meeting in a week, or this week, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, we meet on the 13th, okay? We're going to meet for about 3 days, and then that will conclude. And then hoping, I don't know, Madam OPA, how long that would take you to decide. So depending on her, hopefully within, a reasonable time. After that, depending on her judgment, then we will either move forward, or we will hopefully settle something, right? We'll probably settle with whatever the OPA decides on. But I'm confident that the OPA's judgment would be in favor of the DPW.
Okay, as you mentioned, Deputy Director Andy, DOE has submitted all their lists.
Yes, that's correct.
You're not expecting any change order anymore. I mean, we're not going to go down this road and then come up with the excuse we want a prettier looking gym versus you need a gym. You need a classroom. I mean, you do have standards, right? I mean, you do have the write-up or the drawings of Ukidu, JFK. All you guys had to do was just change the face of the building. That's really all it is.
Yeah.
Classrooms are standard.
Well, it's just a little more difficult than that, but, you know, you could take that and probably look at it and maybe make it your template if you'd like.
Right.
But, you know, because of the geographic location of where Simon Sanchez is, the amount of property left, and that sort of thing, things needed to be taken into consideration and not just taken from a previous drawing and mapping it onto a piece of property. It's just a little more difficult. Now, with DOE, I do understand that, you know, they want a Cadillac school in a school, right? So what they've done was, in the very beginning, from my understanding, is they had, instead of providing what was absolutely necessary to open the school, to be feasible, to be productive, to meet the standards, they kind of went just a little overboard. So, and I don't blame them. You know, we want the best for our kids. We want the best for the school. So we had to kind of trim that down a little bit. And where we are today, I think, is exactly where we need to be. So all the specs are there, all the list of the collateral equipment. I don't think we're going to have any more questions regarding the necessity that DOE has or requires in order to get this IFB going.
Okay. Mr. Nongro, not to go off a little bit, but DOE, it was on the news, they're losing 80 acres, Andy South. The only issue is because they never built a school there. And I'm only concerned that because you have in your hands the ability to hopefully grant and build the school, and it'll still meet the timeline of Department of Interior or DOE or US DOE. I'm just concerned, can that still work? And if it can, you don't need to build on the same compound. You can move that same project and drop it on an empty lot, pretty much. Could that be possible?
Well, I would have to definitely look into that. I can't answer that question at this moment. I would have to research it and find out what the dates are, you know, regarding that. If it could be done, it wouldn't be a bad idea. Then what we could do actually is, and this would come through legislation again, is we would build a new school at that fifth property that was actually designated for a high school, which never materialized at the time.
To begin with, yeah.
Yeah, so what would happen is if that was the case, then, you know, Simon Sanchez, because of the overcrowding in many of the schools, could be refurbished, remodeled, and then maybe used as maybe another high school or another middle school or maybe another elementary school, depending on the need of DOE. So, but I can't say at this very moment if that's possible. I would have to look into it and see if that is still available to us at this point in time.
Okay, the only reason why I asked this, and for my colleagues, just to understand this, that when I was on the board, when I was the chairman of the board, the Department of Education, the governor then, Governor Camacho, awarded 5 projects. The 5th one was never ordered to proceed, and that was the Northern High Schools. That's the only reason why I throw that out. I just wanted to ask that, but then I'm going to ask the AG's office first. Because of the recent protests and what's been on the newspaper and what the Attorney General didn't make a statement about the protests, does the Attorney General's office plan on submitting a letter or anything to avoid any further consideration of the protests?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I'm not familiar with the issue about that you just talked about, of the Attorney General indicating that she's going to...
No, the governor has come out and said that the protest is considered, and the OP has already made that statement that she doesn't believe it is, but it's not, was that frivolous? It's actually you can't talk about the current protest, but the Attorney General's office, I've read that on the paper, the governor's office that made that statement, and the governor, I guess, is basically trying to speed up the process of building Simon Sanchez. And the only way is to get a letter from the Attorney General's office. That's the only way to stop the protest, if I'm correct. And then I don't know. Legally, that's something the AG's office has to respond to.
I think maybe what you're considering or what you're talking about is the process of a letter regarding finding of substantial government interest.
That's correct.
Okay. At this point in time, the substantial government interest is not on the table. Because there is now a protest going on, and as the public auditor mentioned, you know, we're very hesitant and reluctant to speak about the pending litigation at that point in time. But at this point in time, a substantial government interest determination is not on the table. that would actually have to be considered with the, and how that process might occur with the departments and the agencies involved.
Okay, Mr.
I just wanted to get one clarification. Maybe DOE might be able to get the answer for this. It's my understanding that the northern property is completely lost. DOI is not giving that back to us. So I think we should just stop that discussion because it's not happening, as I understand it.
Thank you. I know that the superintendent did have a meeting with U.S. Department of Education, but I don't know the status of that request.
Well, just for everybody's information, the information that I have is that it's not coming back to Guam. I mean, it's gone. But that still doesn't obviate the question that the chairman asked about why couldn't the Okadu plans and specs be used on the Simon Sanchez property. It's not like when we moved the museum from the crevice by Government House to flat land down here in the Ganya and had to deal with pilings. They're both solid coral bottoms. So what geographical or differences are you talking about that would make it difficult to? Because I keep using the analogy. When you're rich, you can have a custom-built house. If you're not, then you just have to deal with a track house that will protect your family, provide you the 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, but you cannot afford a custom-built house. I mean, that's just a reality.
And before you comment, Mr. Andy, I'm from Jigu. I'd like to see a Cadillac in Jigu. But if it's not possible because it impacts 38 other schools, the renovation, GW's next, and there's other schools that are falling apart, I hate to see them get shortchanged, and we try to figure out where we're going to get money, but please.
Yes, first to answer the speaker. I did not say we couldn't use it, but I did say, because like I said, I'm at a disadvantage right now. I have been with the agency now just for a little over a month and a half. All this negotiation, all the meetings that DOE had with GEED and the DPW, that could have been brought out then. You know, if that was the plan, if DOE saw fit to utilize that template of Okadu High School, then that should have been realized then, you know. But today, and I cannot speak for what happened prior to my return to DPW. I don't know exactly what the plan was. I don't know exactly what they were thinking of back then, but that was available to them at the time when the RFP was put into law so that Simon Sanchez could be renovated. So I can't answer why it wasn't done, but I'm not saying that it can't be done, but what I'm saying is maybe DOE took a look at it and said it wasn't feasible. I just don't know the answer to that question, Mr. Speaker.
The other thing is that a question to the auditor. In part of the as I understand it, part of the problem with the last several bids, fiscally, is it fiscally responsible to put onto a huge bond or a leaseback agreement collateral equipment that has a short lifespan and have it paid back over a 25-year period?
But that's how I'm sorry. The government does not have the money to spend for collateral equipment, and where are you going to find the money? So we did that at Okadu was the first one, as well as the other smaller schools, the three elementary schools, as well as the middle school. We did that on the first go-around, okay? We did that at JFK. We did that at Tizen, because the government does not have the money to spend, and collateral equipment can be, upwards of $5 to $10 million, depending on more expensive for a high school versus an elementary or a middle school. And so while I understand where you're coming from, but the price tag includes what we call a turnkey school. Walk in, the next day everything is there. My desks, my chalkboards, my whiteboards, whatever you call them, everything is there, and the school doesn't have to look for all those kinds of things that's really are part and parcel. It's kind of like when you build your house, you also want to have your air conditioner, your refrigerator, your stove, and all your cabinetry and things in place. So yes, I think from that perspective, fiscally, from that perspective, we want a turnkey operation. The moment Simon Sanchez is built, the students can walk in, we have the ribbon cutting, the next day they can all go to school. We're not scrounging around for desks and chairs.
Should that also include soccer balls and weights?
No. I wouldn't be surprised if it did.
Thank you. Senator Tom? Adam?
Yeah, the idea about basically taking the design of, let's say, Okudu, which I think was the more recent school that had been constructed, and basically taking that design and using that to construct Simon Sanchez with some site adaptations, certainly seems to have a lot of merit that deserves further review. But I really wonder if does DOE or does Gov Guam own those designs? Because as I understand it, the way the contract is written is that we're really leasing it back from them. They went out, got the financing, built the school, and then we're renting it from them. And if the contract, if that lease agreement is anything similar to, that I've read, is that if we don't make the payments, I guess the guy that built it and went out and got the financing can go in there and basically use the facility for whatever purpose. So I wonder if we're even, if that's DOE's property, or it belongs to, and as a result, we're not privy to being able to use that. I mean, it certainly would cut down a lot of time, avoid a lot of expenses, because we're not having to reinvent the wheel. But I think that question needs to be answered.
Senator, from what I'm told, Randy is our liaison to all of these schools, and you're correct, they are owned by the developer, so they're not DOE property.
So, okay, they belong to the developer.
Now also too, but I'm not sure if we've ever made a request, so that's probably possible, but from what I'm told, it is their property.
Even if the architectural plans aren't DOE's, if DOE can just decide that's the same size of a gym that they want because it's worked so well for, you at least have that as opposed to going from a 700 to a 500 seat to a multi-purpose. The size of the classrooms, has that worked at Okudu? Can you take that as compared to JFK? Even if you don't own the plans, the size and the concepts should be there, that should be readily available to you, that don't need to have the architects. It can be your design. You can come in and you can say, this is what I want. I mean, when I designed my houses, I tore things out of architectural and magazines and went to the architect and said, this is what I want, this is what I want. So and there's no reason why and so I paid him to do the architectural plans for the house and the engineering for it, but I came with things that I wanted, and I knew that that's what was going to go in. And You have two high schools that have worked fairly well. Which ones would you prefer? Use whatever is the better of the two as what you want to go into, as opposed to, I think I want it to look like the Sydney Opera House, you know, or some other thing. Forget it.
So one of the things that I know was done in the process of developing the specs for DOE and our input into DPW was to take the school community of Sanchez and tour Ukudu and as well as JFK and just to kind of look around and to look at the gym, see what they liked about the gym, what they wanted to change, looked at the cafeteria, looked at the hallways, and they created a list, almost like a punch list of things that they liked and things that they didn't like. I'll just give you one simple example. At Ukudu High School, they have, similar to like Southern High, they have sunken doors for every classroom. Now, it's nice because it has a little crevice that you can paint a different color, but from a school standpoint, when you're standing in the hallway, you have too many crevices where students can hide. So that's an example of them walking through and finding things that they liked and didn't like about JFK. JFK, for example, they like the classroom sizes, but the air conditioners are inside the classroom. So you hear this throughout the classroom because the machine is actually inside the room. So those are things that they listed down. Please don't put the air conditioners inside the classroom. So there is a, I think they did it once for every school, but they did create their punch list, and that was part of the process.
Mr. Sanchez, you took the constituents of Simon Sanchez to those other schools. Is that what you said?
Members of the Sanchez community. I can give you a list of who participated in that.
You know the number of schools that have been built throughout the world? DOE hasn't learned yet. There is a standard you follow. You don't have to come up with sunken. There's a standard that's throughout the nation. And exactly what Senator Adder brought up, it may be owned by the developer, but DPW should have access to every building that's built for government use. There should be a standard. I'm just trying to understand why you guys are looking at what would be nice versus what you need. That's what I'm trying to understand, okay?
Well, I was just describing some of the things that we found when we did that walkthrough to Ukudu and JFK, because the speaker did ask if we took those into account. So knowing that these were two schools that were built, the obvious question is do we like them or not? Because I did ask that question. Can we just take everything from Ukudu and just build another Ukudu at Simon Sanchez? And that would be the extreme, because I don't think it's as easy as doing that.
But Mr. Sanchez, in the past 3 years, the people of Jigu have only said, I don't have a safe school to go to. They never talked about, I need a Cadillac big school. They've only asked for, we want to go to a school where we can learn. That's all they've always said. And they've said that in the previous hearings and so forth. But I'm going to ask my colleagues if they want to ask questions. Senator Agustin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, everyone. Madam OPA, thank you for highlighting some of the protests that unfortunately has hindered this entire process along the way. You know what I find very interesting is, Mr. Leon Guerrero, with all due respect to you, there are a number of your team members, your management team members, who have seen this process over the course of the last 4 years. And my question is, why is it that none of them are in the hallway to be able to directly respond to any questions on behalf of the legislature? That's one question I have. Only because you're a new face. It's refreshing because you come in with a different perspective, trying to understand the system, but you've only been in the system, back into the system, the last 2 months. So to me, it's not necessarily about what legislation gets through, because we've already seen 3 different pieces of legislation passed by this body to try to help the process along and to expedite it, as recent as Public Law 34-19, sponsored by Senator Adder. My question is, what assurance should there be a negotiation on the existing protests with the protestee, and something is worked out between the government of Guam, albeit through DPW, and that particular company, starting the process all over again? What is the assurance that the people of Guam and the community at Simon Sanchez High School would have that no longer are we going to have to some extent, administrative errors identified by the OPA in some of these appeals. And that's one of the biggest reasons that some of these protests have been successful, because personnel who were supposed out of DPW, in concert with whatever group was created as a result of that, that some of these boxes were not checkmarked in terms of attached documents when the RFP went out, in terms of additional information, documentation, site visitation, ensuring that all of these processes with this RFP, the previous RFP, that they were not completely addressed in documentation. Administrative errors on a minimum of 2 separate protests that were successfully won by the company that filed the protest. So what is the assurance today, aside from you having returned back to DPW, what is the assurance that you can provide members of this committee and also DOE, as well as all the other members of the community, that this time, that the process will proceed and it will not result in administrative errors should there be a follow-on protest? Because that's the certainty that we need in terms of making sure that it's not an administrative error or mistake, but perhaps it's a different issue. And that may be subject to interpretation. So can I just ask you that question? What assurance can you provide? There's no assurance you can provide that there will not be a protest, but that it will not result in administrative error.
Thank you, Senator Ogden. On my arrival to the DPW, I realized exactly how important this whole issue was with Simon Sanchez. I was fortunate enough to be involved with the JFK building at the time. Yes, we went through a protest as well, but at the end of the day, JFK is now built. It's an excellent school. You know, it provides excellent education for the students, and we want the same to happen to Simon Sanchez. So, administratively, I will make sure, absolutely sure, that anything and everything that has to do with this IFB, that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. I will not leave any stone unturned. I will double check, triple check, quadruple check everything. Everything that needs to be in that bid packet will be in that bid packet. Everything that DOE requires from this IFB will be included. I will include all documents that need to be included. That's all I can assure this body with, is the fact that I will work tirelessly to make sure that when that IFB is ready, that it should not have any administrative flaws in it whatsoever. I cannot promise, or I cannot make certain that it won't be protested, because that's the spirit of the procurement process, you know. So every bidder has that.
That's why, Mr. Leongoro, I qualify my statement about administrative errors. My focus
I know you
is
did, but I'm just saying,
on the administrative
yes,
errors.
you're absolutely
component.
right.
Yes,
you're absolutely
because
right.
if those administrative errors were not part of the equation, then probably one of the protests would not have been successful. And that's my personal
It would be a
opinion.
higher percentage that it wouldn't be protested, yes.
So thank you very much for that assurance, and I certainly hope that your team has a list of all the items that need to be addressed, because working off of the top of your mind, having been an expert, having worked at DPW in the past, is not going to be enough. It's making sure that every single, like you said, T is crossed, every single I is dotted, and that there's a master checklist that is necessary to ensure that at least the requirements of that IFB, because right now we're still talking about an IFB process, that process with the IFB would be clear from any administrative error, and thus barring any possibility of a protest. So, Mr. Leongoro, I appreciate that sense of assurance, and I certainly hope that the existing protests with Cortec would be addressed, whichever avenue or decision ultimately the OPA makes, then hopefully the process can be restarted, and that we'll get an award presented to whatever contractor so that they can be able to proceed with this process. But I think the OPA, Mr. Chairman, also alluded to something a little earlier about not identifying a cost for the construction of Simon Sanchez High School, as opposed to the additional funding source that would be available for the repairs of the other 34, 35 schools. So we need to certainly, within reason, keep that in mind so that, in fact, we can also address the repairs to some of the other schools. So thank you very much, Mr. Leon-Guerrero. Thank you.
Senator Ruggan, if I may, in the IFB, it does state it's the lowest, most competitive bidder. So whichever bidder wins it, it would be the lowest anyway, but most responsive at the same time. So that number we can't guarantee. It just depends on the specs and how they mark things up. Especially with the problem with H-2B workers today. We just don't know what we're looking at this point in time.
Yeah, I was going to allude to that with the situation with the H-2B workers. That may complicate the cost structure and it may increase, but let's hope that that's resolved shortly. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.
I'd ask, Senator Adda, would you like a follow-up question on that one?
Well, there's the pending appeal with the OPA, and that right now is scheduled for, I believe, December 20th to have its initial meeting. Now, what comes of that, I don't know whether that's going to be settled in one meeting or what. But my question would be, how much is DPW leaning forward with the assumption that, whatever assumption it wants to make, that OPA is going to settle this thing within 1 week? But how far forward is DPW leaning that as soon as this protest gets resolved, that you're ready to get back out of the starting gate again? Now, we know what went wrong with the last IFB. They did not, in the solicitation package, they said, you will maintain the developer will maintain the buildings according to a certain maintenance agreement that's attached. DPW did not attach that. They said that the grounds in the solicitation package, the developer was required to maintain the grounds in a certain manner according to the ground maintenance lease agreement, which was not attached. Has DPW now developed those agreements that should have been attached in the first place?
Yes, they have, Senator Adda. As a matter of fact, on my second day at DPW, I called the team together and I asked them to give me all the RFIs that came in during that time frame from the first IFB to the fourth IFB, right? I mean RFP then IFB. I told them to call every DOE to make sure that all the specs, all the updated specs, all the collateral equipment be submitted as soon as possible, because we need to update that version as opposed to the old version. Since my second day at DPW, that's all I've thought about. So, Senator, if you're asking if we're ready to get out of the gates, we were ready last week.
All right, thank you. That's important.
Madam Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. I just want to confirm, so Attorney Espaldon, I'm reading from the PDN November 13, 2017, and it says, in his weekly address, the governor said he's grateful that the Office of the Attorney General has asked the Office of Public Accountability to dismiss the latest, quote, unnecessarily disruptive and spurious protests, unquote, that Cortec filed. Is that correct? Or you're saying that's incorrect when you say it's off the table or it's not on the table?
I think it's different. I think the issues that we're talking about are different here. I think what the Attorney General and what you just read has to do with the actual litigation itself at OPA and how we are contesting that at the OPA. I think the other issue that the chair had raised has to do with the issue of when a government agency, when there is a protest, wants to bypass that protest and move forward, there is a process whereby there's a determination for a finding of substantial government interest. So I believe there are two separate issues in this case that we're talking about.
Oh, okay. So you filed a motion to dismiss in the OPA, in the procurement appeal.
There's a bunch of motions going on currently and pending, and there's a lot of motions actually, and so I'm not exactly sure which motions are up right now, but we are contesting the protest appeal.
All right. And Mr. Leongaro, I'm glad to hear you're focusing on this project. I guess, you've been given that latitude that you're going to be the lead on this? Is that correct?
I'm certain DPW will be the lead on this.
There's a bill, of course, that we're considering to put DOE in charge of the procurement. But our questions to DOE were, right now you have a team, and they want the same team, right? But so right now you have a team. What is the issue between you and DPW that you can't make your concerns known? And I guess I'm just going to ask you, are you open to hearing from DOE what their concerns are? Are you open to criticism before you go out? Your team has to make these kinds of decisions, and I can't imagine that you wouldn't want to be open to especially criticism, because if they notice there's something not attached, I would hope they would bring it up, and that everybody's equally responsible and equally, engaged.
Senator Talai, it's going to take a team effort to build Simon Sanchez, as it was a team effort to build JFK, as it was a team effort to build Okudu. DPW is DPW. It needs all the parts in building the school. It needs DOE, it needs GIDA, it needs every criticism that can come its way. It needs to be open to every criticism that comes its way, because it can only get better if you heed some of these criticisms that make sense, that work. Then, of course, there are going to be some that don't. But you have to have an open mind whenever you deal with the procurement process. You have to be. Because if you leave a stone unturned, most likely, it may be administrative, most likely it may lead to a protest at the end of the day. So yes, Senator, it's certainly a team effort.
And the 100 million, I'm not sure if I understand this correctly, but the auditor referred to this 100 million, she said, was set by DPW. Can I just ask where that comes from? How?
Well, it wasn't, that 100 million didn't come from DPW. I think that came from the legislature when it was first given out as an RFP, if I'm not mistaken. I wasn't here at the time. But yes, it's 100 million, and I even spoke to Gita, and we're looking at maybe tops 5 million annually in debt service for that 100 million. That was a number thrown at me from Gita. But the important thing here we need to understand, and DOE also needs to understand, is that we need to build Simon Sanchez. We need it to be a practical school that provides all the necessary tools so that the students can actually learn. But they also need to consider the fact that there are other schools out there that need the same repair, that are in dire need. So we're trying to streamline the specs. We're trying to get it to where it just needs to be, so that that school is a functional, practical school, and then the remaining balance of that monies from whatever it costs for that school, 65 million, let's say hypothetically, the 35 million can be dedicated to the remaining schools.
Right, and do you have those numbers or not really? Are you able to give us what you would cap?
No, because at least we don't have those numbers now, because if the next IFB goes out and the next lowest, most responsive bidder is awarded the contract, then we'll know exactly how much we have left.
All right. And what about when you say you're trying to so there's a possibility, is there a possibility that the other schools will not be fixed if we leave this, the law the way it is?
There's a lot of considerations that need to be taken into place. As the Senator and I had discussed earlier, we have an H-2B problem. Mm-hmm. That would definitely escalate the price of the new school, the new Simon Sanchez. It may have increased it by 5 to 10%. I don't know what that magic number. About 30%. post structure is about 30%. So if you're looking at a $60,000 school, at $60 million school back then with no H2B problems, 30% of that is 18 million. So it would now cost us $78 million
that's
as
why I'm
opposed to
asking.
$60 million back then.
So is that a yes?
Yes.
All right. And I mean, no, I just think we really need to know because we're responsible for those other schools just equally. And all right, and okay, so what about, then I want to ask DOE. So DOE, when we were here for a prior hearing on another bill regarding Simon Sanchez procurement, we asked you at that time, I remember the specs being a big topic of discussion. What are these? Are these specs? Are these just a memo? Is this just a dream list? We had no idea. And I walked away from the hearing thinking, DOE was not firm in that either. And now I hear from the auditor that they were considerations. That was the term, correct, that was being used. Thank you. And we asked at that time. And so, I mean, the same exact questions. Why aren't you using the same plans from UKUDU with, input from the UKUDU principals and teachers as to what doesn't work there so you can make, of course, those changes to the hallway, whatever, or JFK, or, either. And it's very disturbing to me that we want to move this whole procurement over to DOE when, yeah, it's DOE. I'm curious, are you confident in the latest specifications that have been given to DPW? Is that what you want to go with now? Is that a pretty set?
As a quick answer to that, yes, we are. Each iteration of a procurement, excuse me, DPW has given us an opportunity to provide additional input. So each time we've actually gone back to the school, we've gone back to our folks to make sure that every line item that we've requested is up to date, and they've given us a chance to kind of make any additions. So we've done that each time we've gone back with the
All right, so how many students are you planning for?
Oof. So we ended up with 2,300.
And how does that compare to the current population?
Sorry. I should know these numbers in memory right now.
I mean, are you planning for an expansion?
Yeah,
More than the current, okay.
that's correct. It's only a little bit, it's only a little bit over 1,800 right now at Simon Sanchez.
Okay.
So it's a,
All right, so that's what I wanted to know. So you made that decision,
yeah,
how much you're going to cap it? And are you,
anticipated growth.
is there I remember at GW, one of the issues was that not all the students can fit in the gym at the same time. So that's an issue at these big, public high schools,
Yeah,
and
all
we
the
can't
schools,
have
Large assembly, yeah.
yes, large assembly. So how is the plan currently? Is that going to be possible or not?
I think it's about half. Can I fit half in there?
Yeah, the gym was actually designed to fit this. Hi, I'm Randy Romero from DOE. The gym was actually designed to accommodate the student population, to include floor space and also bleacher space. Right. So, and to answer your question, yes, we actually put in that design.
That's good to hear. I'm glad for that. And so can I just hear, I mean, we're trying to gauge whether we should put our confidence in DOE as a lead on this or remain with DPW. That's one of the questions before us, unfortunately. But what is the explanation as to why DOE did not move on that Andy South property and use that for the school? Wow.
Yes, I don't have enough background
I mean, you guys
information
came
on the
to
Andy
us
South
and asked for
property.
double session, or threatened double sessions and all kinds of things, and it doesn't really make sense if we had a property available to be building while we continue with Simon Sanchez.
Yeah, so I don't have all the historical information about the Andy South property. I know one of the challenges we had is there are waterworks wells that are on there right now. So based on, I guess, the restrictions based off of those wells, we're not able to build a school with a proper configuration. Excuse me.
Madam Vice Speaker, in the early days of the build-up, and when the chairman was chairman of DOE, there was talk about building the Northern High School, but its proximity to Andy South and the training that was going on there, it was at that time thought to be not a good idea to have a school next to where there's going to be lots of bullets going off, and whether or not that would disturb this educational process.
Yeah. May I give you an update from our superintendent? So he just texted. Basically, the Navy wants the property, and one of our board members, Robert Chrysostom, who's also leading the military build-up office, is working towards a possible exchange. So there is a possibility for a land swap of another property that's also in Dededo. So that, I think, is currently in the works.
I think, Mr. Sanchez, we got to be careful how we say the land swap, because at one point, the land swap they're considering is closer to Dededo. It's not in Jigo.
Yeah.
It's different. If you're in Jigo, you're building for Jigo, then it's okay. But when you're saying moving land swap from the 80 acres in Jigo to the, basically the land swap they're looking at and they were considering is the one right across Prestige Auto.
Yes.
Okay? They should just give that up for a middle college for GC, but for Simon Sanchez, that's a different story.
Yeah,
Okay, I just
so
want to make sure that's
I
clear.
was just clarifying that that's the status on that particular property, not advocating that the Sanchez property be built or Sanchez be built there. Yeah, but thank you. I can answer the second part too. With regards to the testimony that we had about the bill proposing to move it to DOE, it was a tough kind of testimony we had to write, because we had to consider the working relationship that we already had with the committee, and we found no flaw in it. I mean, aside from the different protests, the working relationship we have is very, very positive, and DPW has been very accommodating. So that's why in the beginning of the testimony, we want to make sure that we clarify that our support of the bill was not in any discontent with DPW's work or the work of the committee. It's really just to demonstrate that if the legislature did decide to give it to DOE, that we would be ready. In fact, we've already started talking to our procurement folks. We've met with the board. We've met with our facilities folks. And that's actually how we generated the conditions we had, is if it were to be determined that it goes to DOE, we didn't want to be caught flat-footed going, well, what are we going to do? I mean, we took a lot of time to actually prepare for the event if that were to actually happen. But it's not that we're pushing for it thinking that we would do a better job. I mean, we would do the best job that we can. Whether or not that would be better than DPW is really up to, I guess, the results. But our support of the bill was in no way meant to show discontent with DPW or the current committee. So if it were to stay with the committee, I don't think there's any communication issues or problems that we have at this point that we would have to overcome. Because like I said, every time we've communicated changes or communicated concerns, the committee and DPW has been very open and accommodating.
Well, I hope that committee that you've engaged for, if you guys take it over, remains engaged. You should have a committee engaged for the building of Simon Sanchez regardless, and they should be pushing DPW every day and helping them if they've come up with better ideas. Then that should always be in your meetings. I mean, that should be how it's done. And did we put what we thought were the best team together with the best, who has, the interests of the students at stake and the interests of the people of Guam? And so we're hoping that you get your best team also, that DOE has to get its best team together, and not, regardless of the setup, I implored the superintendent, lead it. I mean, if you think they're dragging their feet, then lead it. You're a part of the committee. I can't see how you can't do that. So I just say, whatever the setup is, we can't, whatever it is, DOE should lead. I mean, you should lead. You should check them every single day. What's the progress today? I mean, I am serious. You need to have a team that really gets this together. And I know we can do it. I know you can do it if you just put all your time and energy. And it cannot be anything that, like, we can't be, it's like our jobs here. We can't, like, not ask questions. You can't, like, try to be politically correct, because that's how we end up like this. We end up years and years later because nobody wanted to say, hey, you're doing it wrong. Hey, why are you doing it like that? Just do that. And I think if you guys do that, DPW, there's going to be no issues. And I wanted to ask DPW, did GITA propose any other financing for this project? Did they suggest that you divide it up, collateral equipment versus other parts, like the speaker suggested? I mean, do they stick with this leaseback for everything, even the short-term parts of the building? GITA's not here today.
Yes, that's all been addressed. You have a list of collateral equipment, and that's stipulated in the bid package. You have a list of the specs.
Right, but I'm asking, did GITA suggest anything differently? That it would be more economical for us to do it differently?
Not that part. It wouldn't. Now, if the building grew, or if the population grew and more classes needed to be included, those are factors that would determine the actual cost of the construction bid.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice. Senator Tom, before I get to the speaker.
So my question, it's actually not a question, more than a statement of concern to DPW. Several weeks ago, there was an article in the paper about, I guess, the protester Quartet asking, I believe, the OPA to sanction DPW because it was not forthcoming with information that it was requesting. And I don't expect for you to know the answer to that right now, but I know that it was a deputy AG that's assigned to DPW, if I understand correctly, that's working with them. And I just hope that the request for information that the protester is asking is not going to be an impediment or an obstacle to making sure that come December 20th, when OPA commences the hearing, that we just immediately go into a recess because DPW hasn't provided the information that's being requested, or at least have the arguments ready. So again, that's just kind of a follow-on to the earlier question that I had about, how proactive has DPW been in making sure that we get out of that starting gate as soon as OPA issue is resolved.
Could I just make a point of clarification? There are two separate appeals before us. The hearing on Wednesday is on DPW's assessment of liquidated damages for the bridges, meaning the Route 1 bridge and the route by the Bank of Guam. That's what that appeal is all about, all right? The second appeal, and that's actually appeal number 10, and we're doing that first because the third appeal, or actually the fourth appeal on Simon Sanchez has to do with the notice about the notice of termination, whether or not that is a valid consideration to be part of the IFB. And so that's why we wanted to move, that's why we moved 10 first to resolve whether or not the liquidated damage assessment, because those bridges were completed, well, Route 1 was completed about 2 or 3 years ago, and the Bank of Guam bridge was completed about a year and a half ago, or a year ago, I believe. That's this Wednesday, okay. The 20th is the Simon Sanchez appeal on the negativity of inserting their notice of termination, and that's why there's that a second appeal. They're both, well, we're also 10 is at 10. Yes, yes.
If we can, Senator Brooks, if we can get just your schedule of all the appeals and the schedule, it's online?
Yes.
Okay.
And we're also having another hearing this afternoon at 1 o'clock. Again, the process here is we have the hearing and all the filings with that. But then what we're doing is what is referred to as a motions hearing. This is to hear the motion to dismiss, the motion for summary judgment. That's what that is for. And usually you try to do those before your actual motion on the merits. That's what we call it, motion on the merits, as opposed to motions to dismiss. You know. So that's why we're having another hearing this afternoon at 1 o'clock, and that's on the bridges.
Okay.
Could I just ask for DOE to provide the documents regarding Andy South, like some kind of finding that you didn't want to build it near, or you could not configure a school around the water wells, or?
No,
or
the water
that,
wells is not an issue.
whatever.
I checked into that. I was going after that in my committee. Senator Ogun?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just have one follow-on question, and this goes with the understanding that hopefully the appeal process will be completed within a reasonable time frame, and then should the proposed legislation to transfer the responsibilities to DOE not be entertained in sufficient time, then obviously you would be ready to kick out of the gate with your process. My question is, we received an assurance from you that you will cross your T's and dot your I's as the Deputy Director of DPW. What if your administrator, your commander-in-chief, or your chief executive decides we're going to reassign you tomorrow to a different agency? My question is, of all your personnel who have been involved and who are presently involved in the procurement process, have they undertaken any additional training since these protests have been filed? Because if, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Senator. I don't know that answer. When I came in, we met and we looked at, as I mentioned earlier, all the RFIs, everything, all the appeals that were filed on the Simon Sanchez project or procurement, and that's what we concentrated on. But as far as additional training, I don't know of any additional training since then.
Because
to date.
my issue is there really should be 2 or 3 different eyes checking the documentation, so that when it comes to you, that you will check it and you will ensure that it's complete, but you have 2 separate eyes, or they're part of your management, your supervisory team, that would assure you that everything is intact. So that's where my question comes in. When we're dealing with a procurement that could possibly reach $100 million to construct Simon Sanchez High School, a brand new school facility, and possibly address some of the repair requirements for the other schools, I would think that your personnel need to be top-notch, and if they need to go back to step 1 and get retrained so that they're able to see all these documentations, all these requirements, read through the 1,000 pages of RFP, whatever number of pages are released, then they need to complete it. They need to do it, because what if you are removed from this entire process? Then we have the same personnel. We may have a new fresh of eyes as a Deputy Director of DPW who may not be aware of the entire procurement process. So that's one of the questions and one of the concerns that I have. So Mr. Leongoro, if you can please get back to your agency and work towards ensuring that your personnel receive any additional training that is required so that they can cross the T's and dot the I's, so that when the document gets to you, it's been reviewed 2 or 3 times, and then you finally review it. Because we need to proceed with this process. It's just taking too long. And this idea about using other designs for templates, I think that's an excellent idea in terms of trying to save the people of Guam money. But if we're going to move with this process, we've got to move as quickly as we possibly can, so that, you know, the students, as a matter of fact, several of us in this table, a few nights ago, listened to over 40 students out of Simon Sanchez. 2 of them came back specifically to provide testimony who already graduated within the last 2 years. And they're saying, government leaders, you've got to stop. If you're going to make a promise, stick to your promise. And that's where we have to, as government representatives, ensure that this process proceeds and that there's minimal complications along the way. So please check on your personnel, and if they need training, provide them that training. Thank you, Mr. Leongoro.
Mr. Chair, if I could just add to that comment. I think, well, it sounds like we're looking at DPW as the lead agency on this. The T's need to be crossed and the I's need to be dotted, also by DOE and also by the Attorney General's office, because they were part and parcel of all of this. So all of them, DOE is just as important to have a fresh set of eyes, a new set of eyes to go over everything, as well as the Attorney General's office. They all need to be involved in that, in making sure all the T's are crossed and the I's dotted. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
About 5 years ago, I tried to make sure that all the T's were dotted. I mean, the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted, and we had 2 pieces of legislation that were passed by the legislature. One was that anything over $500,000 was supposed to be, you may have a team, but the coach is the AG. I'm afraid to even ask the question, where was the AG in this process, and how could the IFB have gone out without the attachments if an AG was overseeing it?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the section of the law is 5 GCA 5150 is the law that requires the AG to be involved in any procurements over $500,000. And for this procurement, we did have specially assigned AGs. We had the AG that was the assistant AG that is assigned to DPW, and we also had assigned a very experienced assistant attorney general to this procurement, who is available, who's not there every step of the way, but the law states basically that we have to act as the legal advisor at every phase of the solicitation. And so I cannot say, unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, about the issue about the attachments at this point in time. Those are things that I think that we will work on with DPW as we move forward.
But 5 years ago, when we started this process, the Attorney General then assured me there was a checklist, and that there was a checklist that everybody was supposed to go down and check. We did this, we did this, we did this. And it would seem to me on an IFB with attachments that would be a check before it went to publication, before it was released. How could it be possible that someone would be so blind or inept to allow that to escape them?
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I can get back to you. I don't know the specific what happened or what did not happen. We know it did not happen, but how it happened, I can get back to the Speaker.
Thank you. Please, I'm going to be expecting a letter from the General on that question. The other one, there was also another piece of legislation that we got passed, and you probably will know the number, but now compliance. As of last September the 30th, 2 months ago, everybody who's supposed to be doing any procurement, including the directors of departments that do procurements, was supposed to have gotten certification that they completed the 4 modules of the procurement process up at GCC. I know that at a previous hearing, the superintendent of education assured me that many members of his team had completed the 4 modules, and they were going to provide me, which reminds me, please provide me the list of all those that are certified and who has taken any courses from DOE. I want the same thing from DPW, because I know that the last deputy did not have certification in procurement, and the superintendent didn't, and both of them admitted it at an earlier hearing that neither of them had certification. But to the superintendent's credit, he was starting and was moving through the modules, as I understand it. So I need to know, and it was supposed to have already been provided since October the 1st or 31st of October, the list of who has been certified in each one of the departments, and that anybody who's in procurement that doesn't have certification is supposed to be laterally transferred out because they're no longer supposed to be there. So though I understand that we have a great team, you guys are supposed to be the captain of this whole thing. And these mistakes are really unforgivable.
Your point is well taken, Mr. Speaker. I think that when we look at the statute and it talks about us being the legal advisor for the team, we understand that, in the sense of making sure that the law is being complied with. And I think we try to do that when they have the questions that they ask us about the procurement or about the process. There are forms that are available. The AG even made created very detailed step-by-step forms. We are not the, and we've always kind of delineated our role as being involved in the actual procurement itself and being in part of the administration or the management of the procurement, as opposed to being the legal advisor, because that puts us into the process, which is not exactly as we see our role of being the actual, in the actual process of the
understand
procurement.
that, but the thing is that in your checklist, are attachments attached? Is that on part of the checklist in the IFB or the RFP? Either one. Have you gone back to look at it to determine whether or not all those things are supposed to be checked? And have you looked at the checklist to make sure you're complying with procurement? Because process is also important. And though we're not supposed to, you guys aren't supposed to talk about the most current protest, in giving the checklist, also compliance with procurement law. As I understand it, the basic problem of this last procurement is it was void ab initio because someone forgot to tape the first meeting. So compliance with the procurement statute is imperative. Have a completely separate checklist for that. In order to have a meeting, including the one this week, do you have notice requirements that are supposed to be done for that? Have you complied with it? When you get there, is somebody responsible for pushing the on button to start with the recording? Really, seriously, as the lead agency, you've got to do all of these things for them because you're their legal advisor. Well, maybe you don't want to be involved in the intricacies of it, but give them a checklist and tell them if you're going to have a hearing, make sure 5 days notice. This has to be complied with, this has to comply with, and everything. And before the start of the meeting, somebody's going to look at that and say, all right, we can start this meeting. The notice went out. Everything that we're supposed to have done is done, so that she doesn't have to do all these protests. And then somebody put a big sign, turn on the microphone.
Turn on the recording. Where's the tape recorded? Because most meetings weren't tape recorded.
Yeah, that was one of for the first few protests. It was just something as simple as that. Please make sure that before you even have your meeting this week, that you have the checklist and make sure that there's absolutely no reason. Don't meet until you have that. Because if you do, you're only going to set the groundwork for another protest. Make sure you know what the law is supposed to be for the first meeting and what needs to be done. And with all due respect, guys, stop talking about finding an exchange property, DOE. Simon has to be rebuilt now. Waiting for an exchange of property will mean some of these kids, their children will be going to Simon before we get Simon rebuilt. It's going to be on the Simon property or across the street that we already own. There's no talk, there should be no talk of any wait for an exchange and see if we can do it. It's not happening. Not now. Maybe later you can have another one because population seems to be growing up north. But right now, really seriously, you have the Simon property, that's it. And I'll just close with, when I was procurement chair, I got legislation passed to try to address this. Please, everybody, just follow the law. Get certified. You guys lead it and follow the checklist. Because it's the simple, stupid mistakes that are going to cost the protest. Not turning on a recorder at every single meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senator Tom, you have a follow-up question.
Thank you. You know, so far up to this point, we've been talking about, I guess, leaning forward so that when the green light is given, we can get out of that starting gate and reissue the solicitation and all that stuff. But I'm concerned about, and I think it's important that we think about it now as to, once we get out of the starting gate, we're going to need some additional technical resources to be able to receive these proposals and to review them. And we're going to need it at that point, but we're going to need it even more after the award is made so that, you know, as the designs start coming in at the 30%, the 60%, somebody's going to have to be looking at that. And that's going to cost some money. Yeah. And you're going to need to figure out, is that something that needs to be built into the solicitation such that whoever gets awarded, you're going to have to put money up front so that a solicitation can be put out for a consulting engineer to review the designs as they start coming in from whoever is awarded the thing. And we need to start thinking about that now, because probably at the point of the solicitation is where that question may need to be asked. Unless the alternative to that is DOE comes back to the legislature and says, we need an appropriation of however much money to be able to hire that technical consultant. So I hope that DPW would think about that before it issues the next solicitation.
Thank you, my colleagues.
Very good comment, Senator, if I can, because you're talking about contract administration, and for a $100 million solicitation, that does require an outside, to ensure that the contractor is doing the things that is wanted. Who is going to speak on behalf of the owner, which is DPW and DOE? The contract administration can be, is normally a percentage of the contract price. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Senator Brooks. And then, my colleagues, I thank you for all the issues, the points that were addressed to the DPW, DOE, the AG's office, and from the OPA. I just want to comment, number one, when I was on the chair of the Board of Education, they said in 10 years before they closed JFK, the Army Corps of Engineers said that in 10 years, if you don't maintain JFK, they'll close it. They close it. It's been 10 years since my son graduated from Simon Sanchez, and I honestly believe, I'm surprised they haven't closed Simon Sanchez for their safety and for all the conditions going on. And I'm really hoping that what Senator Adder brought up, that DPW is ready to run. When the protest is over, and I'm hoping that DOE, I'm almost sure you probably don't even have a CIP plan yet, a capital improvement plan, for all the other schools that are going to be addressed during this project, this proposal. Because I don't know if you read recently, I was sent an email that Congress is actually taking a look at Dodea schools and closing them down on Guam. If they do, it's exactly what happened when they built it, where we had lost a lot of money in DOE. That may be coming back, and with the 500 additional students, and I'm not saying consider it, plan it, but just don't say you weren't warned. You know, there's writings on the wall. There's a lot of downsizing, tax reform, school closing on the federal side. DPW, DOE, DOE, please stay on track with DPW. And I'm hoping the AG's office will keep an eye on whatever you guys kick out. Because the people of Guam are watching out. And, you know, Senator Brooks is going to be waiting for the next protest. That all said, does anybody have anything else they wanted to bring up? Senator Castro, my vice chair? No? Anybody else on the panel here would like to speak? Nothing? Yes? No? No? Okay. Okay, the committee will continue to receive testimony from the people of Guam and anybody else that would like to submit anything. And please address it to the Committee on Education, Finance, Taxation. Submit it via email, Senator Joe S. Agustin@gmail.com. My office is located at Rand Care Building, 2nd floor, Suite 3, 761 Marine Corps Drive, Tamuning, Guam. Jesus Masi, for your attendance and participating in today's hearing. And for those at home, thank you for watching. It is now 10:32. This meeting